This meeting is being recorded.
There's normally some music with this presentation, but there isn't today, so apologies for that, everybody. If anyone can see me talking and cannot hear me talking, then please put a comment in the chat. I'm going to stop this now because that's not giving the audio that it's meant to. But as I say, if anybody has any issues with their audio or can't hear anything, obviously you won't be able to hear me telling you to put any queries in the chat. So I'll hand over to Charlotte, and I will also put that message in there as well. Sorry about that, Charlotte.
No worries. Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte from the Green Register, and thank you for joining us at Futuregrid tonight. It's the first in our series of Twilight Talks, so they're free 1-hour events on subjects that we don't necessarily bring into our normal training program. So, you know, hoping for some interesting discussions tonight, and we're lucky enough to have 3 great speakers who are going to talk to us about electric vehicles. So we've got Peter White from Western Power, who's going to be first with us tonight. We've got Lloyd Allen of Bristol City Council, and we've got Ben Pearson, who's an electrical installer locally. So we've got a sort of Bristol focus, but it's quite useful maybe to see, to look at the situation in one place. So we're looking forward to this. After the presentations, we're going to have a bit of time for questions and answers. So what I'd like you to do actually is put your questions and answers, or questions and comments rather, in the chat box, and we'll pull those out as we go through the session. And after the presentations, we'll go to a bit of a panel discussion and try and bring some of those questions through. If we have time at the end of the session, we'll open up some breakout rooms and let everyone just discuss what they've heard tonight and anything else they want to discuss in those. I guess sort of general housekeeping stuff. We won't have a break because it's only an hour tonight. If you've got any technical issues, then do pop a note to Seb in the chat, and he'll try and help you. And yeah, just maybe keep your microphones off while the speakers are on. But you're welcome to keep your videos on, entirely up to you. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Peter now. Thank you very much, Peter.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi, Peter.
Right, connecting LCTs and the consequences. Right, background. The history, the UK have had a network historically that goes from the generator through national grid, through the distribution network operators to the transformers. So the load flows were all in one direction. And if you go back in time, then typically the customer was a few small single phase appliances, and that was it. If you look at where things have gone to, we've started with DG, that's being your photovoltaics and your wind. We are now getting the uptake of electric vehicles and heat pumps. You're getting the smart solutions, which are demand-side response, energy storage, network automation, and ultimately you're going to get peer-to-peer trading and DSO. And what that's leading to is load flows are going to be bi-directional. Well, they are bi-directional at this time because customers have got PV on their roofs, they've got battery storage, and at the moment, there's a few trials on V2G, but it's limited to CHAdeMO and 4 different vehicle types. So the whole network has changed dramatically, and it's required a lot of work by the National Grid and the DNOs to enable that to happen. So the government's carbon plan sees a reduction of emissions from heating and transport. This is going to be quite flexible loads because typically if you do an average mileage in your vehicle and you change to a battery electric vehicle, you will only be charging about every 2 to 3 days. That's if you're fortunate enough to have on-street charging, off-street charging, because 60% of people have got that facility. So DNOs have to be ready to accept the demand as it comes, and from work that's been done, we're anticipating anything up to a 40% load growth. So getting to net zero, BEIS in 2018 published this graph, and heating is provides 37% of all the UK CO2 emissions. So there's about 24 million homes that exist on the gas grid. The government have already said they want 600,000 heat pumps installed a year by 2028. And one of the low-hanging fruits that BEIS is seeing is that there's 4 million off the gas grid homes that's heated by oil, LPG, or solid fuel. And BEIS are looking at those to be heated by heat pumps. So this is the BEIS view of decarbonizing the heating in buildings. So the future home standard is going to be published in about 25. That's going to see new builds, and they're already saying that they won't be heated by natural gas. There's going to be an increase in heat networks. As I said, they're targeting off the gas grid to be done by heat pumps. And then it leaves this huge triangle at the bottom, which is the 24 million homes and how they deal with it. So if we look at EV charging, WPD are highly involved with Project Rapid. There's 130 motorway sites in England that are under consideration. 48 of those are in WPD's area. And of that 48, the average MVA is 7 MVA. And that is quite a large amount of electricity. So to charge an EV, we see it in 4 places: home, work, destination, and en route. So as I said, DOT have said that average mileage is 8,000 and 10,000 and dropping. It's closer to 8. So again, as I've said, we predict that's equivalent to about 135 kilowatt hour charge every few days. So one of the prerequisites whenever any LCT device is connected is for the installer to notify the host DNO. And that's one of the things that has fallen by the wayside. And it's rather quite critical because it allows the DNO to work out if clusters are forming, and especially on the older suburbs or estates, because they weren't designed to the level that we design them now. And by being aware, we can put mitigation in ahead of need. So it's all the DNO's object to make sure that we supply a network that's fit for purpose. Typically, whatever assets we have last for 50 years. So you can see why it's critical to understand where the installs are happening. Retrofitting of heat pumps and EVs, that is going to be one of the areas that needs quite a bit of forethought, because especially after the Second World War, rather small cable sizes were used as the service cable and as the main cable. And another issue that you've got is, especially from the 50s, 60s and 70s, they were looping services. And if any LCT device is connected, then the host DNO needs to de-loop that service, and that's done free of charge. So you can see why it is critical that we know where the installs are happening. So, as I said, we are expecting to see higher demand, and one of the things WPD have done is, because of this higher demand, we went out to a consultation, and we're now, with every new build and every service alteration, we're actually installing a three-phase service cable, a three-phase cutout in a larger meter box. And again, that is up to the householder to make use of the services, whether it's three-phase or single-phase. We're not saying you have to use three-phase, we're just putting the option there. My personal view is it is beneficial to run the house on a three-phase network. So from a consumer perspective, price is a key hurdle. Currently with heat pumps, there is only one supplier with a heat pump tariff. And another big issue with heat pumps is that, especially in retrofit, if you're running or installing a heat pump into a house with a very poor EPC, then the heat pump will be working for a living, because the heat pump supplies low-grade heat. It's circa 45 Celsius as opposed to an 80 Celsius for a gas-fired boiler. So the simile I like to use is, your heat pump in your house is similar to your fridge. You don't leave your fridge door open. When you've done your shopping, you put all your stuff in the fridge, shut the door. So if you've got a lossy home, it's like leaving your fridge door open and wondering why your food's gone off. So if you want to lower running costs for the heat pump, you need to do a lot of work in getting the EPC up to a minimum value of a C or above. So we do a lot of distribution future energy scenarios, which are on the back of the National Grid future energy scenarios. And by 2028, we're looking at close on 3.2 million EVs in Western power distribution. Currently in ED1, which ends in 2023, we've allocated 112 million for the reinforcement, and 6.1 of that is directly related to heat pumps. So as I said, we're looking to have 3.2 million by electric vehicles by 2030 and about 220,000 heat pumps by 2023. In simple terms, an electric vehicle would use, if you've got a 4-bedroom detached gas-fired central heating house, your typical after diversity maximum demand is 2 kVA. So if you had an EV, it's a safe assumption, and you do 10,000 miles a year, that your energy consumption will go to an ADMD of 4 kVA. So EVs are getting to the point where they're getting almost price parity. We've seen a huge increase in vehicles. This is probably brought about by the 1% benefit in kind from 2021-22 tax year, because just in the first 6 months of this year, we've seen a 15% hike in battery electric vehicle sales. So WPD used the ENA EV and heat pump application so that there's consistency across all the DNOs. So this allows, if you're connecting an EV or a heat pump that is 32 amps or less, it's just basically a notify. And if it's greater than 32 amps, there's a procedure that we follow. And there's an SLA where we've got to respond in a finite time that we adhere to. So we've simplified the process to make it a lot slicker, because we're envisaging once we get into ED2, which is from 23 onwards, that we'll be looking at about 2,000 LCT connections a day. We've provided guides for EVs, for local authorities, for businesses, and for Joe Public if they're buying an EV and want to connect chargers. We've also provided guides for heat pumps for local authorities and businesses, and they're available from our website. With EV charging capacity, there's a number of solutions. As I said, you can charge at home using the 7.4 kilowatt. There's on-street charging, and then there's charging at work. Both of those, all of those are probably fast chargers. Your hub charging solutions, that is similar to rapid chargers. We're offering systems for local authorities where, for example, you could put a 1 MVA and say 6 150 kilowatt rapid chargers, and that'll turn people around in about 30-40 minutes. If they've got a 50-60 kilowatt hour battery. Depot charging, again, depending on what vehicles, when you use them, we can use time of use tariffs, we can put a bigger supply in, we've got all the options. So with all these things, if you're looking to install them, especially with depot and charging solutions, the sooner you go to the host DNO and open up a dialogue, the better it is. And it makes the whole journey a lot easier. So in order to future-proof things, we're pioneering what we call the super-fast electricity, which puts a three-phase service cable into the house. And it's like, for me, the comparison is when you go back to the stage where we all had the internet for the first time, we had dial-up network, and if you had a couple of megs download speed, you thought you'd really arrived. Now we've gone to full fiber and you're getting 100 megs download speed. Likewise, with three-phase electricity, if you've got a 7 kilowatt charger and take a Tesla Model 3, and the battery's flat, it's probably going to take you 11 and a half hours on a 7 kilowatt charger to charge it. If you had a 22 kilowatt, and I should stipulate, if the manufacturers put a 22 kilowatt charger control system in the actual car, then suddenly that charging is down to about 4.5 hours. So you can see suddenly you've got flexibility, et cetera, and the other thing it drastically reduces is the losses on the network, because losses are the load in the cable squared times the resistance. So physics says the resistance is always going to be there. So the best way to do it is divide the load by 3. Suddenly your losses drop down. The lower the losses, the more people you can connect on the network. So this is why we feel giving people the option of having a three-phase network is infinitely better, because to retrofit costs you a few £1,000s. So if we do it right from the start, you haven't got that worry of converting to three-phase and it costing thousands of pounds at some point in the future. So it just helps massively. Current projects, we're working with Pobl, Zero and the Welsh Government in new build and retrofit projects where we're installing 3 phases. And with the new build, there's the complete suite of LCTs. There's a program logic controller or energy management system, looking at the entity and trying to reduce fuel bills as low as possible. And for example, there's a 4-bed house detached, and it's got a EPC of A, and that house is running at 21 Celsius with a 3 kilowatt heat pump, and my 24-hour load cycle is showing it flatlining at 0 because of the PV and the battery storage. So for me, that is the way we need to go out into the future. We're looking at another site in Penderry and Swansea where we're retrofitting social housing, and that housing is a complete cross-section from 1900s to the modern day. And we're looking at how you can take each type of house and get it to a net zero. That's only just kicked off, so that's early days. And we're looking at novel ways how we can retrofit 3-phase service cables into privately owned houses so that it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. As I said, we've done a consultation in Q3 of 2020 to introduce three-phase service cables. The industry saw that as a huge benefit, so it's now policy and we've adopted it. And I should point out it's entirely up to the customer whether or not they want to use three-phase or stay with single-phase. The work's been supported by the Renewable Energy Association as well. And that's it. A quick whistle-stop tour, and hopefully I haven't overrun too much.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was really interesting to get a bit of a background on how the grid is going to be changing massively over the next few years. I was quite amazed by the target of 3.2 million electric vehicles on the roads in our region by 2030. That's quite an uplift, isn't it? That's brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll go over to Lloyd next. And when all three have delivered their presentations, I think we'll come back. We'll have a bit of a panel discussion. We'll bring all the questions together then. So keep popping your questions into the chat and we'll gather those all together. Over to you, Lloyd. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Can you hear me okay, just to double check? Yeah, thank you. So hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of the work that Bristol City Council has been doing in the area of trying to encourage electric vehicle uptake, which is primarily through the provision of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So I'm just going to hopefully give you a fairly quick summary of what we've been doing. The main project that we've been undertaking over the last 4 years is called the Go Ultra Low West project. Key missing word from that project is the word emissions, so in case that doesn't make sense, but the Go Ultra Low projects were launched by the Office for Low Emission Vehicles. They're now called the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, and the Go Ultra Low brand was to push that initiative. So Go Ultra Low West was one of 8 projects across the country, but for local authorities. Just before I go into that, I'm just going to give you a quick summary of what came beforehand. Across the region, Bristol City Council, together with other local authorities, owned and operated a charging network called Source West. It's the public charging network called Source West. We had rapid chargers and fast chargers. We had some good ones, like the ones on the left, and we had some bad ones, like the one on the right, which became part of a bush and then eventually a building site. So this really encapsulated there was a real difference of good, reliable, accessible charge points and charge points that either stopped working or just became inaccessible. So the whole point of Go Ultra Low West was, well, what have we got? What's worth keeping? What do we need to revamp? So in a nutshell, Go Ultra Low West is it's a £7 million project, ultimately to increase the uptake of electric vehicles. And there's various different project elements. Substantially, about half of that budget went towards electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And that was on largely the public network, but also electric vehicle car clubs. And so we were aiming to finish this year, but we're overrunning because of COVID and other reasons. But basically, we launched the Revive vehicle charging network, and there's pictures of us looking happy and cold on an October morning as we launched our new network. So Revive became the successor to the Source West charging network, and we launched with our first new rapid charge points in Eastfield Park in Bristol. And since then, we've gone on to install one of our flagship rapid charging hub sites. This is at the Bristol and Bath Science Park, and this has got a solar array. And so we've also got fast charge points as well, like in the top right corner in our car parks. And we are continuing to build those at some speed now, thankfully. So in terms of what's interesting about this is that local authorities tend to do this differently. Some local authorities will partner up with a commercial partner and go for a concession have a hands-off approach, but collect a share. And for Source West, that was largely local authority owned assets, but there was some grant funded to private operators. And as part of Go Ultra Low West and as part of the launch of Revive, the assets are 100% council owned. So we are fairly unusual in that respect across the country. We're not the only ones, but most councils tend to do it in the concession. Essentially, this is the region that is covered by this project. So Bristol, together with South Gloucestershire, Bath and North East Somerset, and North Somerset. As part of the project, we developed our own GIS mapping tool, which enabled us to strategically work out where to put charge points, as well as include data to show us where charge points were needed. And we've got a publicly accessible version of this map. And here's a very quick update I've just added to the deck, which will give you basically all the blue pins are charge points that we've gone live with. Green are the ones installed, and the purple ones are in the planning stage. So we've also been able to gather site suggestions. So in the way that Peter said that it's really important for Western Power to know when power supplies are going in and what demand is. For us, we're the ones commissioning or setting up charge point installations, but we need to know from the public where the public are telling us where the demand is. So as well as the data that we've got, which is telling us on a strategic level, on a sort of across the city, we also have invited site suggestions, and as you can see, we've had plenty. All the little yellow, orange pins are site suggestions from the public. So as part of the Go Ultra Low West, we've been putting in mainly destination and en route chargers. So that's the ones that Peter was talking about earlier. These are typically 7 or 22 kilowatt chargers and also 50 kilowatt rapid chargers. We've also been putting in car club electric vehicles. So we worked with another project called Replicate, which is an acronym I won't bother to bore you with, but basically it's the two projects working together. We put the infrastructure in, and Replicate were able to part fund Co-Wheels Car Club to get 10 electric Renault Zoes into existing car club bays, and we electrified the car club bays with charge points, and we've got these 10 in operation still today. And in doing so, the council, Bristol Council, we learned how to build and prepare charge point sites. So we have a supply agreement where we can purchase charge points and back office warranty and maintenance. But we carry out the design and the site enabling works, including the ENA connection that Peter referenced earlier to Western Power, to be able to prepare the sites, and our installer will come and fix a charge point and commission it. So we've developed a lot of in-house skills in terms of site selection, how to choose sites. We developed an 11-step criteria process where we determine how to score sites. We now know how to design sites, and we know how to prepare sites through our contractors. Something that Revive is doing very recently, we've just joined something called Zap Pay. This was announced last week. Zap, for those of you who know, Zap Map is a bit like the Google Map of charge points, and one of other resources available, but they've launched their third-party payment system called Zap Pay, where users can now search for charge points, plan a route, but also pay for charging. So we are one of the second tranche of networks, along with the Genie Point network, whose system that we run on, and users later on in the year will be able to use Zap Pay as well as to be a Revive member to pay for charge points, which will be a really good thing, I think, particularly for people visiting through the area that may not want to sign up. In addition to that, we've delayed the rollout of contactless payment on our rapid charges because there's a better solution coming from our suppliers, and we're just waiting to implement that. Just a sort of a strategic overview. There's a massive change in terms of Bristol City Council setting up a project called City Leap, which is going to set up a joint venture and will result in £1 billion worth of investment for the Energy's future smart system for renewable energy for the city. Charge points possibly will get wrapped up into that. It's a bit unclear at this stage, but that is at an advanced stage, and I wouldn't be able to tell you more about that anyway, as I'm not allowed. There's a lot going on in terms of transport infrastructure, and electric vehicles play a key part in that, complementing the walking, cycling, public transport. Clean air zones, as most people will be aware, being brought in Bristol and Bath. Bath is live, Bristol is next summer. There's a lot of strategic work. So you might ask, why have we been carrying on this project without a piece of strategy behind it? But the strategic work is now being kicked on at some speed within Bristol, but also within the west of England. So apologies for all those acronyms, but ULEV, ultra low emission vehicle, WECA is the West of England Combined Authority, and I think that's covered all the acronyms. So BCC, Bristol Council. So effectively, there's a lot of strategic work that is going on to dictate what we do next. What we've also been doing is making changes to local developer planning conditions to make sure that charge points are going in with developments, and to make sure that anything going on the public network will be something that we can add to the revived network. So in short, this is still where the council will prioritise its efforts, but there is a reality that there's a huge demand and there's a massive impact that travel has in terms of what gets put out into the atmosphere. So we acknowledge that there's a big piece of work to do whilst we still try to incentivise walking, cycling and public transport. So what else are we doing? We've been trying to add extra sites to the Revive network as we've gone, and continue to do that. We've got the car club charge points going in, as you've seen already. It's not been that straightforward, if I'm honest. It's a difficult thing to make work, and it has to be a workable business case for everyone, but it's still a good thing to try and get done. We've also had some taxi only charge points installed, and actually that says under construction. They are under construction in Baines is Bath and North East Somerset Council. Apologies again for the acronyms. So in Bristol we've done ours, but the system that's set up for the taxi drivers, the incentives package, is still coming. The electrification of Bristol City Council's own fleet is underway, and that's happening at speed. We're launching a project called the Centre of Excellence next year, which is essentially a commercial electric vehicle try before you buy scheme. So someone will come in, they'll bring their vehicle in, they'll have a device fitted that will track a month's worth of usage. Then they'll come and sit down with someone and say, well, actually, yeah, these are the number of the miles you do in a day, these are the dwell times, and we'll lend you this particular vehicle, try it for 2 months, see how you get on, and hopefully show that you'll be able to run your business on an electric vehicle. So commercial vehicles and the clean air zone, that's a big area of concern for many, many traders. So in addition to that, residential charge points are a key thing. It's pretty much the only area of central government funding that is available is the on-street residential charge point scheme grant, which goes some way towards some of the capital costs. We are preparing a bid whilst carrying out a lot of analysis on where we would put these. We're also doing pilots of how private landowners might want to connect their charge points to Revive for use out of hours. And it's just a little flavour of the kind of charge points that we're looking at. These are it's not the full range of the market, but in terms of residential charge points, they're still public charge points, but they're more suited to residential locations. And that's what we're doing. We're going through. So again, the AUX is on-street residential charge point scheme, and OZEV is the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles. Bit of a whistle-stop tour. I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to questions later on.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. That's brilliant to hear what's going on locally. Lots being rolled out and lots happening in the future. Thank you very much. So we're now on to Ben. Ben's an electrical installer. Well, he can introduce himself in a second. I'll hand over to you straight away. Thank you, Ben. Ben, we can't hear you.
There we go. Sorry. Can everyone see that? It's all good?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Hello, guys. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for that's grand. There's quite a lot in there that I kind of like to reply back to in a way, but I'll focus on what I've come to talk about, and then maybe ask you some questions as well. So I'm an electrical installer and designer, and I've been involved in low impact and off-grid dwellings for many years. And I then kind of moved across into more traditional housing and domestic installations. And so when I think it was Rob actually who brought up what's the elephant in the room, the insulation, and how's our heat pumps going to work in all this scenario, that's the kind of thing I deal with daily. I talk to people on the ground, in their houses, in their mobile vehicles, in their cabins in the woods, about how to use their energy and how to save their energy and to keep their energy, and what they need to install to make everything work. And so I do a lot of this. I do a lot of off-grid installations where people are living quite in different ways, and are maybe like subsistence level or lower energy use. And then when I come across into like the grid scenario, and I help people with installations in their houses, we're looking more at substations and things that you'll be very aware of, hopefully, if you're living in a house. You know, your cutout coming in with your meter, your isolator, and into your consumer unit. And these two things have traditionally been quite divorced. But what's coming up now is a more integrated idea, and a more kind of, hopefully a situation where people are more aware of their energy consumption and what it actually means to have this coming in, this amazing, magical scenario of having electricity turn up. And that's, so it's like an on and off grid scenario that we're talking about. I'll quickly mention when Peter was talking about heat pumps earlier, it's the idea of future proofing is like, if you see here in this consumer unit that I installed in someone's house in St. George, we've got some spare ways there, because this is going to be key to anybody thinking about their electrical installation, is that so much of it has been on gas or been on other ways of doing things. And if we're electrifying most of our domestic energy use, then you're going to have to think about all the extra load that's going to come on. So that's just a kind of pointer in a way to be thinking about what each individual family, community, group are doing. They're going to be changing, I think, a lot of their outlook as to what's happening with their installs. So where does it all come from? It basically is this big book, that's a little one, that tells us as an installer the standards to the regulations and standards from which we work. So this is kind of like the baseline of everything. And within that, there's a lot to do with electric vehicle charging, and it's quite a contentious issue. There's a lot of technical issues with installing an electric vehicle charger, and it brings quite a lot of challenges when thinking about your home, which may or may not have off-street parking or on-street parking, may or may not have an up-to-date consumer unit that can take that load, may or may not have a loop supply like Peter talked about, which you're going to have to ring up Western Power to change, and yeah, may not have the capacity. And the majority of people that I speak to, and a lot of people on low incomes, can't even countenance, first of all, getting an electric car, let alone having a driveway or having any like interaction on their like terraced streets where parking is such a huge issue anyway, for this. So I think those are some of the conversations that are being had and are obviously going to have to be had. How is this? How are the electric vehicle charging installs going to occur in this big city and beyond? The exciting bit, which is kind of where all of this started, where this whole talk started, was the upcoming changes to the wiring regulations. And if you like wiring regulations like I do, this is quite a big thing. There'll be a new chapter in this book called Part 8, and it talks about prosumer. Prosumer is low voltage electrical installations. And like with the smart grid that Peter showed us earlier, this is how we, or groups of us, will interact with the grid. And if you take anything away from my talking now is prosumer is what I'm trying to get across, is that we would be people who both produce and consume electricity from the grid, and put it back into the grid. And that's kind of set out in the regulations. This is just a draft for public comment, which is already closed, unfortunately. So it might be coming out in the next edition. It might come out in the others, but it's internationally, these standards are recognised and they are being implemented elsewhere. So this is kind of where we think it's going, and it's already happening with the DNO and the DSO. So if we have a look over here, we've got where the DNO or DSO's grid input is, and we'll be going back and forth between the grid and ourselves, essentially. Part of this could be that you have your electric car charger, your electric car plugged in, and it would act as a battery bank in the same way as you could have your energy stored in the battery system in your house as well. And there's many different variations of what this could be, but a kind of glossy future would be that we'd have electric cars plugged in and wind turbines and solar panels and everything being monitored and regulated by an energy management system that makes it fluctuate or work in a very smooth way. And it's quite exciting. And for somebody who is trying to find ways of reducing use of fossil fuels and reducing so much use of carbon and people's relationships to energy in general, it's really exciting. But the dynamics of it are going to be interesting, and it's probably something that we should be quite aware of about how we can make these dreams and these ideas realities. One of my main issues, I think, is probably that we need to just full stop, look at our own power consumption and look at, do we need to be using so much energy, and check all of these things amongst us and see if we can be doing more for our next door neighbours or for our communities. And in a way, the regulations that they're proposing kind of help this, because as prosumers, you could be feeding back and forth. And I can talk to anybody individually if they'd like to about what this specific, each one means. We don't have very much time, but you could have your own battery storage. You could have solar power on the roof that you feed back and forth to the grid, and then sometimes be islanded, so go completely off the grid. You could have a collective one where you had a plant room. So if we remember the substation that we saw from Western Power earlier, maybe there'd be a building like that on the end of your street that would hold battery storage and connections into distributed generation that would then feed to each individual house, and that could come off and on grid when it was necessary. Or you could each have your houses and link into each other and share your resources that you have in each of your own properties. There's many kind of layouts for this, but those are essentially three that would be quite useful just to take away: individual prosumers, collective prosumers, and shared prosumer electrical installations. So the operating modes, just to go back to those again, are direct feeding, which is where the grid feeds your property; reverse feeding mode, which is where you go back out and either sell it back to the grid or share it out around you; and then islanding mode, where you're just cut off essentially from the grid. And that can happen at various times throughout the day. There could be switching, your energy management system, your electrical energy management system could be switching you back and forth throughout the day. And this could be dependent on an energy variable tariff, where it's the right time for you to come off the grid or the right time for you to go back onto the grid, depending on the price and whether or not the distributor needs to curtail you because there's a whole road of electric vehicles that they know at this certain time is going to need a big bump, things like that. This is the kind of conceptually as well. I presume that Peter might say that this is, much more of a developed plan than even what we're talking about here, but these are the things that we're kind of going to be thinking about and interacting with, and probably deciding to do as more engaged consumers or prosumers. And yeah, there's stuff to do with the electric vehicle charging that I can talk about more, but I will probably keep going because I've only got a few minutes. so I drove past this yesterday, a development of zero carbon homes, and it made me think about how this is being rolled out and how how quickly things need to seem to be done by 2030. It's quite a daunting task, but there are people who have got little roadmaps of this. So, you know, what would a zero carbon dwelling look like? There's the Salsa House in Bridgend, who talk a lot about buildings as power stations. So this could be what you'd be looking at. You'd be having battery storage up, maybe in the roof or in the attic and in the basement. The sun coming down on the PV, feeding in and out with just a clever computer that helps you like understand this. And essentially these things have got to be, they seem quite exciting. They seem like this is what it's going to look like, but it's hard to tell if it is for the people that I speak to in Bristol, who generally can't even afford better smoke alarms, or the people who maybe could have some smart switches, but no, maybe not, just go for the normal switch. It's from that end of things, I've got to definitely say that I can't see the rosy future. A lot of people have got experience with retrofitting in houses and just throughout Future Proof and the Green Register, and it's talking to people about it is quite intense, because you're like, well, yeah, I mean, really, we need to insulate all the outside of your house, or we need to insulate all the inside of your house, and we need to get all the floorboards up and do this. And the shock in people's eyes sometimes when you're saying, well, this is what we really have to do with your old home. So these regulations that are coming out will be applying to new builds, and it's nice to hear about the future home standards, because I didn't know about that very much. And then in terms of retrofit, it's just more conversations about how we implement these ideas, and I think it's probably very contextual on a kind of case-by-case basis. The ECA, who are the Electrical Contractors Association, have made a report called Skills for Climate, which I hope there'll be a link at the end of my presentation. And it's on screen now, and essentially they're saying that there isn't the skills there really for this kind of the big push, essentially. So there needs to be a lot more training, a lot more discussions like we're having today, and a lot more like collaboration to figure out these things. And I think it means a lot more engagement from builders, from trades people, and from the people who we're working for as well. But yeah, there's definitely something that needs to be put across there. And this idea that there's going to be cars plugged in across every street. I mean, in a new build development, I can see that a lot more in a terrace street in Bristol. I don't know what, you know, if you're in St Werburgh's or Euston or St Anne's or how is that going to occur? We don't know. And I think one thing that's definitely lacking is the voices that are generally more affected by these policies that are kind of forgotten. And yeah, so the poorer sections of our society here, people of colour, that, you know, on a lot of the panels that I go to in the electrical industry, it's a lot of white males. I know that in the Green Register, there's a lot of, it's quite white, it's quite educated. It's interesting, like these discussions really should be including a lot of the people that get negatively affected by our energy consumption and by our energy policies. And that kind of leads on more as well to the renewable energy and the fact that the wind turbines and the electric vehicles and the batteries that are going to store all this energy are made in the global south, and the people who are working and living in the global south are the most negatively affected. And I think that's a key consideration as well. And each person that I do speak to, you kind of want to bring that in. You want to be like, so how do who has the right to this energy, however it's been made? I mean, renewable doesn't mean that it's definitely not had an impact on someone else or our world. So I think that's a key consideration, that there's a lot of stuff about vehicle to grid, and there's a lot of good graphics going on. But I think the reality is important to be aware of and have to thought about that while we're making these decisions and we're trying to change things. There's interesting dynamics of microgrids and sharing things with your neighbours and coming together and making cool projects happen. I've got a lot of examples of those. And I would love to talk about any of them to anyone, because there's some cool stuff that's happening. And as much as I want us to be aware of what our impacts are and what our responsibilities could be, I think it is exciting that people are talking with each other and coming together. So yeah, I'm definitely up for it. And that's just to end. That's a nice little example of a future house from an old friend of mine. And I hope that's not what it ends up like for all of us, but that's it. I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Ben. I love that house at the end, and it was interesting to hear about how we might produce and consume energy in the near future. And also thanks for bringing in the social context to it as well. It's something that we shouldn't ignore, we should think about. So thank you everyone who presented for us. I guess we're going to throw the doors open to the panel and bring in a few questions. I've got a few here in the chat that we could begin with, and then maybe when we finish those, we could get anyone who wants to ask questions just to raise their hand, whether it's a real hand or a digital hand, and pick up those questions as well. So kicking off, we've got Fiona's asking any hypothesis on who will get larger government subsidies, assuming large depot get them first and individual households last. I don't know if any of the panel have any thoughts on that.
One of the things that I'd like to mention, pick up what Ben said, WPD covers South Wales, and the Welsh government are spending a hell of a lot of money in optimized retrofit program. And this year alone, they've got 20 million, and it's all social housing. And the projects I've been talking about in the talk, that was all social housing, and they're actively looking to cut the fuel bills and bring all the social housing up to net zero, so that the lower incomes do not feel ostracized. It's something I've been banging on about to Bays for the 4 years I've been in post, that it should be legislated that all new builds come with a complete suite of low carbon tech. So that's PV, battery storage, heat pump, car charger, and a program logic controller that controls it, so that you can maximize the savings. So I'm acutely aware of the impact fuel bills have, because I see it in my day job. So yeah, it's not just looking at the well-heeled, it's right across the piece.
Thank you for responding to that, Peter. Does anyone have anything to add?
There was the Green Homes, not the Green Homes grant, that's all gone now. In Bristol, they're doing Bright Green Futures or something like that. And I'm not sure how that rollout is, but it was interesting to see that there was only 2 PV installs offered with this grant. I don't know. I kind of have a feeling that maybe more needs to be done, but I'm not sure. I'm not kind of in a policy level, but yeah, I'm not sure. I can't say about where the funding's going to, but it didn't feel like there was loads when we were looking into the Bristol Future Homes grant.
I can probably just shed a little bit of light on it. So I should have mentioned earlier. So my role as project manager for the electric vehicles work, I'm part of the energy service within Bristol City Council. It's colleagues from another team within Bristol City Council's energy service who are leading on the Bright Green Homes. And essentially what this is the scheme which the government offered out, which has since been pulled. That funding has basically been put back into via local authorities to be able to top up the scheme that the local authorities were running, or to improve on what the local authorities were offering as a energy efficiency measures scheme for those with low income households and those that most need it. So that the Bright Green Homes was sort of a it's been a relaunch of that scheme, the previous scheme, the Warm Up Bristol scheme, basically. And I'm not best placed to talk on the ins and outs of exactly which measures are being used and what the take up is. That's my colleagues elsewhere in the service, but that's what that scheme is, and it's basically repurposing that funding, and it should mean it goes to where it's most needed, I would say. But I think I would defer to other colleagues to give more detail on that, but hopefully that's a useful summary.
So thank you. I think Rob brought up, and Ben picked this up as well, but the need to, before installing heat pumps, upgrading housing stock, insulation and so on. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or comments on that.
I think before you install a heat pump, you need to do an EPC rating of your house to ascertain where your house is on the ladder, EPC ladder, and they will give you a very good indication of what you need to do. And there's that EPC report will give you some clear indications. One of the biggest wins is making sure you have sufficient loft insulation, because a load of heat exits through the loft. And so it goes on. Once you've done that, you can then work out where your next steps are and what is required to be done.
Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, let's just catch up on this.
I see there's a comment there about marine transport. It is one of the things that have been looking at because the heavy fuel oil those vessels use produces a lot of CO emissions. And if you look at one of the charging systems that the European cars use, is the CCS system. That standard was created by the Charlene Consortium, and they're producing a new megawatt charging system which will be used for battery electric trucks. It'll be used for maritime, and it'll be used for the aviation industry. And what that standard is doing, it sets the voltage level at DC at 1500 volts, and the current is up to 3000 amps. So that's quite a sizable flow of electricity going to either the truck, the ship, or the plane. And what they're planning on doing is having those fitted on ships so that when the ship is in port, they're not running their diesel generators, they're actually plugged in to the network. And that'll save all the heavy fuel oil emissions in the port. They're looking at using ammonia, et cetera, to power the vessels. And these are all things that are in the pipeline that it would mean another meeting just to cover off those eventualities. I think the one that's going to impact the most is what Lloyd put on about battery electric HGVs. because, again, a lot of people are saying, oh, all trucks will be fuel cell. Well, I'll give you for example, a 24-ton RCV refuse collection vehicle. A fuel cell one is 800K. A battery electric one is 400K. I know which one I'd pick because you can charge it during the night and you can buy two for the price of one. So these are all things that need to come out. And if you then look at the hydrogen economy, to make 1 kilogram of green hydrogen, firstly, you need 10.5 liters of fresh water and 65 kilowatt hours of electricity. So if you then look at that and factor that into converting the 24 million gas grid homes into hydrogen, that'd probably need the whole amount of fresh water that whales use in a year. And you then got to ask the question, where's that water coming from? Where's the electricity coming from? Because that is gigawatts of electricity. So there's a myriad of things going on in the background that most people aren't aware of.
Good to hear that context. Thank you very much, Peter. I just wanted to say that Lloyd's got to jump off the call quite soon. So if anyone has any questions specifically for Lloyd, this might be a good time. Just pop your hand up or put your mics on. Fine.
Lloyd, I was just thinking about, I get asked a lot by people about how to deal with terraced houses and electric vehicle charging and cables running across the pavement, and as an installer, it's a massive consideration. So it'd be nice to hear what you guys are doing or thinking about it in any event.
Sure. We think about this quite a lot, and we get quite a number of inquiries. As by the sounds of it, so do you. And essentially, it's a very difficult situation because the council has a liability position when it comes to anything on the public highway, and if there is a solution that someone has installed, which could be very neat, perhaps they've carefully trailed a cable with a mat, or they've erected a gantry, or they've gone up a tree, down the lamppost and down, or they've secretly dug underneath the pavement, or they've put a Victorian drain in. So basically all of these solutions, no matter how responsibly or irresponsibly they have been done, create a liability for the council, and the councils are approaching this in different ways. Some councils have, such as Oxford, they've trialled a Victorian drain solution, which will enable someone to get their own electricity supply across the pavement. And that's been trialled partly successfully, partly not. It still creates a risk. And if that was rolled out widespread, I would be slightly concerned. So basically, the Highways Authority, part of Bristol City Council, the position that's taken at the moment is that there isn't a trailing cable solution that is that would meet a standard where Bristol City Council would give the go ahead for that. So whether that is a covered cable, a gully, a gantry, or some other solution. So what we are very conscious of is that this means that people are therefore reliant on charge points elsewhere. So as Peter mentions, if for some people the option is to charge at home, for others it's charging at work, or maybe it's choosing public charging infrastructure. And with that comes a behavior change of, in most cases, what will I do whilst I'm charging? Rather than I'm going to go and fuel up the car, I'm going to do something while it's charging. And along with that, of course, is the consideration of enough charge points, etc. So where this kind of leads is that the on-street and off-street residential charging solutions become very important. And it's a role that the local authority inevitably is involved in playing, because if it was left to the market, if the commercial operators were given the option to install with permissions of councils, the business cases are really poor, and therefore it needs to be a piece of work that's a partnership between local authorities and those commercial operators. So in Bristol, what we're doing is we've recognised that the charge points that we've been able to install as part of the Revive network through the Go Ultra Low West project is nowhere near enough in terms of what the city needs. And obviously we're not the only player in town as commercial, but we are the adopted highway custodians. So there's definitely a role, and we are spending actually quite a lot of time at the moment looking into what we can do in Bristol. So ideally what we want to do is to expand the Revive network, include a residential option, sort of arm of that, and be able to offer residents a solution. So what we are hoping to trial later on in the financial year is our first sites where we do something in an on-street location. I'm fully aware this has been done successfully elsewhere, but it's not the same solution you can necessarily copy and paste in different local authorities. So we're working out what's best for Bristol, and we are hoping to trial later on with an eye to having a much bigger rollout in the next couple of years. So we acknowledge that people will need to rely on public charge points. We also, it's not a right that you should be able to charge at home, but we also recognize that people will feel, my neighbor has a drive and can charge 16 pence per kilowatt hour, whereas I need to pay public charging rate. And that's an opportunity that some people have that other people won't. But it's also about when we move beyond the trial phase that we are looking at provision for the whole city where it's most needed. So there's an equal opportunity to access for this sort of charging infrastructure. So I think what I can say at this point is that we see that there is a large ecosystem of charging infrastructure, and the local authority plays a significant role in some of those areas, not just leaving it to the market. So our approach is that we are looking to be able to roll out sensible and robust residential charge points for people, whilst it's not necessarily a closed door forever about the homegrown solutions, but right now there's too many questions. There aren't standards that would be applicable, and it leaves too much of a liability on an area of the city which is so important for access for so many people. And if we're increasing hazards and obstructions, or the risk of, not just, this is for people's use, not just the liability for the council, then it's not something which Bristol feels is suitable to be able to authorise. So Bristol sees its role in being able to provide an alternative. So a few thoughts there. I hope that's helpful, Ben.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I appreciate your question.
Also, I'd like to jump in there, Ben. I think once you've actually got an EV and you get your head around the changes, that soon a lot of the perceived problems that the media in particular force down everybody's throat on a daily basis just don't exist. I run an EV, and if I charge my vehicle every 3 days, that's a lot. I've got a reasonable commute. I'm looking at 20 odd miles, and I still don't have a problem with it. When you go to work, if the work of putting charges in, you're there for 8 hours. You're going to charge your vehicle up to its virtual full amount. Tesco's do charges as it is. When you go and do your shopping, you can plug in for free. So I really don't think it's the issue that people make it out to be.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I'm aware that we've overrun time. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of really interesting information and stuff that we want to discuss. Can I just have any final questions if anyone has any, or comments?
Like I said, if people go onto the WPD website and look for the smarter networks, and then scroll down to EVs or heat pumps, there's a load of guides there that anybody can download, and they metaphorically hold your hand and take you on the journey and explain the things you need to consider. And it's for local authorities, it's for businesses, it's even for Joe Public, about owning and buying a car and the journey you need to go on. I think you'll find they're quite useful, because when the Royal Mail CEO, you might have seen in the media that there was a bit of a problem in Bristol where they thought they were going to get their chargers installed on a set day, and it didn't happen through various reasons. And he went on our website and he was a little agitated beforehand, found the information and actually made contact with our CEO and was quite complimentary on the amount of information that was available, and the fact that we actually managed to connect their chargers before the agreed date as well. So that's just a view that was put out by him.
Okay, I'm aware that everyone's probably needing to move on to other things and begin their evening, but thank you so much for joining us this evening, and to our speakers as well. It's been absolutely fascinating, and we've got a long way to go, but it's good to hear the progress that's being made as well. Thank you all very much. I hope you'll join us again soon, and I wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.